that is accidental, but rather is a natural distinction that is both that involves both the body and our soul. That we are, in a sense, unique and uniquely made and created in His image. Our contemporary world has now fallen past the modern Enlightenment project, the enlightenment of the modern age. And just to refresh our memory, I have a quote from the book entitled The Enlightenment, which was written in 1967. It's a standard college textbook written by a man named Peter Gay. And he argues for a political theory or a humanism free of the influence of religion as a basis for a mature way to form and to live in society. He writes, "Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. And immaturity is the inability to use only understanding without guidance from another. This immaturity is self-imposed when its cause lies not in a lack of understanding, but in lack of resolve and courage to use it without guidance from another. Have courage to use your own understanding." That is the motto of the Enlightenment. Unfortunately, this argument of his rests on a historical error that the heart of the Enlightenment is freedom of the individual, and the heart of classical Western thought prior to it was to live according to our nature. The value of individual freedom to do whatever one wants is now placed as being more important than living according to the gift of our human nature as human beings. Nature that is not just physical, but also spiritual, immaterial, and also moral, directed towards some good end, that is the true, the beautiful, or the good. Today, this demand of individual autonomy has even now begun to dominate and consume itself by eating other aspects of modern reason, including medicine, biology, and physics, so that science no longer is reliable and no longer is seen to be trusted, but an ideology by which our free choice dominates. We know that it is true that human beings have a nature, body, and soul, and we know that our human nature is binary and that we are either male or female in design, in our function, in interaction, and in relationship. Individual freedom, however, places gender now prior to biological sex. It places a societal role entirely on individual freedom over the biological reality of our genetic structure as well. What does this do? Besides confusing us, it replaces the family's role of belonging with a new role of fitting in, so that I don't belong to my family as a member of a family because I was either born to it or adopted into it, and belong accordingly as a son or a daughter to a mother and a father, and possibly with sisters and brothers. But now my freedom comes first to design myself as I see fit. And in this ideology, then, belonging is no longer a matter of anything more than fitting in. And so the demand of fitting in is such that it depends entirely on my being subsumed into a greater mob, a faceless mob, without really having a sense of true identity, but only being valued by myself or by others for how useful I am to the ends and purposes of the mob, without true consideration of what my needs are. What this does with regard to the beautiful is that beauty becomes disfigured through human mutilation, as well as through other things like pornography, and other means of treating other human beings, including their bodies, as objects to be used and to be dominated by another, or even by oneself, only for selfish purposes. The beauty of the human being and its body-soul composite in nature is that human beings are able to enter into life-giving relationships as human subjects, freely offering and freely receiving love as expressed through shared security and pleasure, not only with the body, but with the psychological dimensions of the soul. This is directed towards cooperating with God in the creation of human life, its transmission, and not its transition. This is what differentiates human beings from the angels, a body, and the capacity to share in God's creation. Angels cannot make other angels. This is really at the heart of Lucifer's hatred for human beings, is precisely that we have a body, and so much of the disfigurement of the body can only come from him. And unfortunately, the challenge is that we sometimes are too late to recognize that. But this also, this ability of cooperating with God in the creation of human life, its transmission and not its transition, is also what differentiates human beings from other animals, other mammals. That is, the capacity to co-create human life intentionally and in freedom with love. Animals, while biologically the function of this act is the same, it nonetheless is governed by such things as heat and the passions that are inherent in a non-rational nature of animals. Whereas our reasonability and our capacity for relationship and design is what shows us the beauty of the transmission of human life that is shared by men and women by their reciprocal consent made in love. It is what beautifully reveals human beings being created in God's image and likeness, the capacity to bring life through love. When the beauty is assaulted by sin, you will find that men tend to use women as objects for pleasure when objectifying them, while women tend to use men for security when objectifying them. Now, of course, I'm not saying that women don't objectify men ever for pleasure. And I'm also not saying that men don't ever objectify women for security. What I am saying is that given our nature, in the fallen condition of our nature, while redeemed through baptism, but nonetheless coming to full redemption over time in a life of grace, is what happens, how we are most vulnerable to sin. That is when we choose not to belong, when we choose not to respect, and ultimately when we choose not to love. In the sense of developing and helping to serve as a mother for your children, it is most especially to show them how to belong and to help them to understand that beauty is inherent in the way that human life is transmitted, and the goodness that it attains is meant to be shared and transmitted in married life, because married life provides the structures for protection of those who are most vulnerable in both the transmission of human life and of being born and coming to full development. And it can be, and that message can be carried forth either by a stand in that corner, or by a or by cooing at times. Each of these conveys the same message because it's conveyed within the nexus of belonging as a family. In other words, that love is to be demonstrated even more than it is to be spoken about. And that the church's teaching on human life and human dignity and the relationship of men and women is really best exemplified and witnessed to more than it is argued about. The good that is brought about in family life and the role between husbands and wives is the sense of belonging and not simply fitting in. The formation of the family as a domestic church. In other words, praying together, simply and not wasting time with a lot of words. All right, I think a good prescription for that is given to us by Jesus, where he says, don't carry on babbling like the Pharisees do on the street corner, right? That the sharing of our faith and the worshiping of God as a family is best done simply and very much a part of the rhythm of life and not meant to be something intrusive and burdensome and difficult in and of itself, but rather something that leads us to a greater gratitude and appreciation of the joy of the gift of life and the joy of family life, whereby our children can have cultivated within themselves a desire to belong and be able to turn not only to their parents, but to their siblings and also real friends and not just people